Welcome to a Trekzone conversation. Matt Miller with you at Trekzone HQ. We're diving into continuity once again today, canon, if you will. Author Glenn Dakin is standing by to tell us all about his new book, The Star Trek Nerd Search and the Quibble with Tribbles.
Beaming around the world for over 450 episodes. Now on Facebook Watch, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is a Trekzone conversation.
This is the Star Trek nerd search concept where, it's much too easy. The audience has got much too good at finding Wally now. It's not enough that you have to find him. You have to spot continuity errors. So in our Star Trek nerd search, you have a scene from a famous Star Trek episode. The first book is all connected with the original series. So these are programs that many of us would have seen many times since we were quite small. And we've chosen famous scenes from The Trouble with Tribbles or Devil in the Dark, Piece of the Action, that people know really well. But we've added in these annoying continuity errors that any real Star Trek fan that will drive them up the wall that this person was not in that scene. Captain Kirk is wearing the wrong version of his uniform. Tribbles do not have fangs, that kind of thing. So
I guess it's a little bit like making it even harder to play Spot the Difference, spot Wally, that sort of thing, because the target audience of your books is are dedicated Trekkies. So
absolutely,
got to give them a challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the mistakes in here are mind bending. They are conceptually deep. We've got these things called super quibbles, where partly thanks to me and partly thanks to Ben Robinson, who is a massive Star Trek expert, one of our project managers, there are stuff in here that kind of things that had been mentioned behind the scenes that could have been but weren't. So some of the stuff was never even on screen, but real Star Trek fans, the ones who really get into the subject deeply, will spot something in the scene that couldn't possibly have been there because it was abandoned on the planning stage.
Wow.
So it's a chance to learn. It's a fun way to learn a lot about the show. I mean, the answer section is very extensive. There's lots of rambling and humorous analysis of the episodes. So it's another way to get to know behind the scenes on the show as well.
And the research involved in coming up with a book like that must have been exhaustive and must have been a long time in the making.
It was incredibly hard work going back and watching lots of episodes of Star Trek. I absolutely loved it because I was so fond of the original series of Trek that I'd almost deliberately given it a rest. I haven't watched it for a few years. I've been watching the more modern stuff, like Discovery. And so going back and watching the original series was amazing. I mean, it's so well made. It's so tightly scripted. It's so funny. The performances are so vivid. And it was an absolute treat to go back and watch this. And I also delved into some of the classic books, like The Making of Star Trek. There were some books that actually came out when Star Trek was originally made, books that came out in the late 60s, early 70s. And I went back and had a little look through those at some of the memos that were exchanged in the early days. Some of the things Gene Roddenberry was telling his production team he wanted to do. And, there's some very interesting stuff in there. Like there's a memo from Roddenberry on Series 3 that the biggest complaint that the fans have is that Spock and McCoy are starting to get on too well, and that the fans loved it when they were arguing all the time and McCoy was always needling Spock. And the fans noticed that they were starting to get on too well, and there was a massive sort of complaint about that. So it's kind of nice, to look behind the scenes and see some of the things that were going on.
It's an amazing franchise that we have that has been going for close on 60 years now. And I say close on 60 years, we only celebrated the 50th a few years ago. But to think that it is such an enduring franchise, to have all sorts of different facets be created about Gene Roddenberry's original TV show that really was just a TV show, has become so much more. Books, the literature sort of I guess as a natural sort of progression maybe, but diving into illustrated books and searches and these sort of books that you've created, I guess, where was the sort of inspiration to create this book?
We were talking. We had some connections with Star Trek Publishing. We do books about. We already do books about the Star Trek spaceships and things. And we were looking at some new areas to branch into. And one of my project managers, Stella Bradley, said, "Well, why don't we do something a bit like Where's Wally, but somehow take it another step, and almost an absurd step further." So Ben Robinson also, he was talking about how fans love to discuss continuity errors. He came up with the great phrase, continuity porn, where some people are obsessed with continuity. They just need to know what happened in every Star Trek graphic novel, every spin-off novel. So they've got this whole, encyclopedia in their minds. So we were discussing that, and we thought one of the nice things to do would be to have things happening out of sequence, people wearing the wrong outfit. We're doing the Journey to Babel, and we've got Sarek. He wears two outfits in that one, but he's wearing the wrong outfit for the reception. They're petty little things, but Star Trek fans, I think, will have a lot of fun. I think what would be a good one to do would be if they ordered this off of Amazon, then they challenged each other to see what in a kind of contest of nerdular wits, and see who could spot the most errors in a minute. When you open the spreads, they're very beautifully drawn by an artist, John Ross, who's drawn for Marvel Comics. He's done a lot of work on Doctor Who franchise as well. And he's drawn these amazing layered, complex illustrations where you've got a Gorn hiding away at the background. You've got the exploding Tribble popping up everywhere. Some of the mistakes are just people acting out of character. Like a Klingon stroking a Tribble, because of course the Klingons and Tribbles don't get on. So they're conceptually wrong. It's very layered, but it's all for fun, and it's another way of celebrating your favorite show. It's kind of it's got a sort of party atmosphere. You'll see it doesn't take itself too seriously. We've got an absurd scoring system, and if you manage to get all the points, it adds up to 1701. So there are kind of silly. There are lots of silly little twists and turns along the way.
Well, the book, of course, is called Quibbles with Tribbles, and as you say, we're focusing on the original series and those famous episodes. Are there plans to do more and branch into the rest of the franchise?
I'm really hoping that we could move on to do Next Gen after this. Also, I'd like to do a book which is exclusively kind of about all the movies, because that's something finite in a way you could do. The good thing about the original series is you've got 79 stories. It's manageable within one book. But Next Gen is much, there's a lot more of it. So you have to find a way of narrowing it down a bit. We'd certainly hopefully if there's enough interest, we would certainly like to do nerd searches about the other Star Trek series and characters. Actually, I've got a copy of the book here. Characters from Discovery, for example, and the animated series, and the movies do pop up in Quibbles with Tribbles as anomalies that you have to spot.
And I guess that's the tough thing with the television franchise, or the franchise as a whole, continuing for so long, that new things are cropping up that weren't there in the original series, and we're sort of placing things around it. I remember in Discovery the references to Archer and stuff like that, and sort of bringing the franchise in as a whole. So I like the sounds of including Discovery in those.
Well, Star Trek has gone into this weird kind of loop now. Now they're going back to Captain Pike, and you've had Spock and Pike and Number One coming into Discovery. That is pre Kirk's Enterprise, but it's you're in this kind of weird timeless continuity now where we're creating new things that happened before the very first series. And what was yesterday's Star Trek fact may no longer be a concrete fact. The facts are changing before our eyes.
And of course, Glenn, with your nerd searches, you're right there and poised to point those out and show us in future books exactly some of these anomalies.
I don't know what it is about fans of science fiction and Star Trek, but they absolutely love discussing mistakes and anomalies. I think it's probably because Star Trek under Roddenberry's guidance was absurdly successful in creating a believable future world. That it not only had its own fashions, but it had its own kind of politics and ideas and ways of behaving, the ways people talk to each other. It's not really like people talk to each other now. There's a strange kind of clarity and optimism. Everyone's got a kind of beautifully expressed way of being, and people just love trying to poke holes in it. Where there's that tiny moment where it collapses, people love to point it out.
Well, Glenn, I want to take you back a little bit to where you got started, because for people that might not know who you are, a little bit of my research says that you're a cartoonist and an author of children's books, including being published in comic magazines, including Escape and Deadline. What was sort of your passion to get started in illustration and writing?
I sometimes think, and this is going to sound like someone from the older generation complaining about the way the world is today. I sometimes think it was the incredible dearth of science fiction and fantasy when I grew up that made me want to create it myself. I mean, when I was a kid, if you missed Star Trek, you thought you were never going to see it again. You didn't even know if it would be repeated. No, I'm not joking. I mean, I used to, and also in England, one of the big shows is Doctor Who. If you missed an episode, the chances are you had no chance of seeing it again or ever knowing what happened on it. And it made you want to sit down afterwards and draw the characters, remember what they were like, remember the jokes, remember the aliens. So, I had loads of school exercise books where I'd scribbled in the back little drawings of the Enterprise. It's very difficult to draw for a child, the Enterprise. It's strange design. And I spent hours trying to draw it in biro and things like that. And I think that was the origin, really, of my love of comics and creating things. I was trying to keep my own fantasy world going.
I believe also, too, that you were employed for a time by Marvel in the UK, writing for The Real Ghostbusters and Clandestine as well.
Yes, it was great fun. We used to have a Marvel UK based in London, and I started out as a writer for them on The Real Ghostbusters. I even wrote for a Star Trek magazine at one point. I remember writing an article about Worf, and this was when Next Gen had just started, so people didn't know that much about the characters. And after a while, I managed to start working on the actual Marvel comics, so I got to write Clandestine, and I wrote a comic called Plasma, which was a really funny one, which was really spoofed all comics and team ups, and I got to use the Silver Surfer in there and Captain America, Captain Britain. And after a while, I was offered a job there as an editor, so I got to work behind the scenes, and we had a lot of fun creating new comic ideas, some of which sadly didn't come out because Marvel UK was bought out by another company in the 90s, and things kind of fizzled out after them. But it was a riot working there for a while. We were always coming up with some crazy new comic.
I can imagine. Well, there is so much to your career as well, so much more than we have time for. But I do want to say that I'm very much looking forward to getting my hands on the Star Trek Nerd Search, Quibbles with Tribbles. It is out now in all good bookshops and online. And everyone who considers themselves a continuity aficionado should hurry out and get a copy of this book and find exactly what's going on.
We've got a line of things coming out. We've also got a thing called Mr. Spock's Little Book of Mindfulness, where we've taken quotes from Vulcan philosophy and we've used them to explore the perils of everyday life. And so we're going to have, I've done some cartoons for that. And there's also a Star Trek cocktails book. So you'll be able to make yourself a Star Trek cocktail, read your book about mindfulness, And then when you're totally blissed out, philosophical, relaxed frame of mind, start looking for mistakes in the nerd search.
That is very cool.
The perfect evening.
A perfect evening of Star Trek goodness. Glenn, you are helping the fans to get through these troubled times that COVID is presenting for us. We can't go out, so the best thing to do is grab your books, sit down, make some cocktails, and as you say, just get deep into finding all these continuity mistakes.
Get deep into the. If you can't go out, get deep into the world of Star Trek. You can go down, into this lovely multi-layered universe with so many great ideas. It's a good time to enjoy the world of fantasy.
Fantastic, Glenn. Thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to catching your book.
Live long and prosper.